Hello everybody, welcome to CIS101 and this is Bob Hendry. Now this is the 20th of November 2018. So what I promised you guys is since this is the week of Thanksgiving is we were going to have the remote class like we have it now since most of the people are gone anyway, at least like 3/4 of you, at least during the day today, there was not a lot of people that were here. So we're going to have this class remote. And I also mentioned that it's going to be a light class. There's not going to be a whole lot we're going to cover. So you can just kind of watch this and take notes if you want to go, but you can safely just watch it. There's nothing really deliverable at the end of this. Now, I don't want to discourage you for not watching this because what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how we can use Eclipse as an IDE, which is a lot more flexible than using, Notepad and the command line, which we've been using so far. So if you're going to be using Java at all, just watch for the next half an hour or so. And I'm going to go through the location of Eclipse, the downloading of Eclipse, the installation, using Eclipse to write a Java program, and using Eclipse to run a Java program. So let's get started. Now the first step is downloading Eclipse. Now a little bit about Eclipse. Eclipse is really the best of breed for any of the Java editors or what are called IDEs for integrated development environment that's out there. So if you get a job as a Java developer, you're going to be using Eclipse more times than not. As a matter of fact, all of the projects I've done that have used Java have used Eclipse as an IDE. Now, Eclipse is free, and it's also a very, not old tool, but mature tool. It's been around for a long time, at least a generation or so. So it's pretty stable, and it has a lot of plugins that are associated with it. Plugins, do different things. Like, for example, if you need to get your Java project or program with some source control, there are plugins to do that. So basically what Eclipse is it's the framework in which to develop Java applications, and also it has plugins for just a great deal of other functionalities. Again, such as doing source control or maybe doing something with a third-party product, such as automating builds, things like that. So for our purposes, what we're going to do is we're going to go over the steps in downloading and configuring Eclipse, and we're going to keep this very simple. Now, the skill level of this is beginner. I'm assuming that you have very little or no Java experience, and you are just getting into Java, and you are experimenting with downloading and installing IDEs. So let's do that. So we're going to start at the very beginning. So we're going to go up into download Eclipse. Now Eclipse has different versions that you might want to download, but to navigate to that you could go to eclipse.org.downloads. Now there are different flavors of Eclipse that you could download. They're all more or less free. I say more or less because some plugins you have to purchase, but more or less you can do this for nothing. Now as far as Eclipse goes, is we can install this in a variety of different operating systems. In our example here, we're going to download a Windows version. So what you can do here is you could navigate here where it says Get Eclipse IDE 2018-2019. I'm going to give this a click. Where it says Download 64-bit. And what this is going to do is, in our instance, Eclipse, or the website we're at, notice that we have a Windows 64-bit machine. I believe I'm running Windows 7 on this machine. So it finds the installer for you. Now, if you want different installers, like for example on different machines, what you can do is you can just click on Downloads and you could pick one. Like for example, if you want to look at download packages, you can look at more packages that you can download. Again, we did the quick version. Basically, or the idiot-proof version, I like to call it. No offense meant to anybody, including myself. So in that version, what happened is we went to Eclipse, and Eclipse said you are on a Windows 64-bit machine, so we're going to download it. But if you want to look at other ones, you have the other stuff or the other different Eclipse packages that you could download. For example, we got the IDE for Java developers, which was the one that we were going to download. And you also got, like, for Java DSL developers, for C, C#, or C++ developers, and also for code committers. Like, for example, if you're going to commit code to Git, we have that up there. I'm not going to go through all of these because I'll leave this to you to determine exactly what you want to download and what it's actually for. But just know that you could pick your package here, and there's just a ton of them that we can actually go through. Now, I'm going to go back and just go to downloads, and I'm just going to go to download 64-bit because it's going to pick my architecture, which is Windows, and it's going to know that I have the 64-bit version. Now, the cool part about this is Eclipse requires, at least to get started, again, caveat, at least to get started, it requires almost no configuration. Now, that's going to change a little bit after you get into Eclipse and start configuring your different Java projects. But let's go on with the install. I'm going to click on download, and it's going to go to OSU, Ohio State University, right? You can select another mirror site if you'd like to, but we can leave the default site that we want to download it from, and we click on download. Now, it's going to start in a few seconds. So if you see it down here on my PC, it's a 48 meg, and I got a fairly quick internet connection here, so it's going to take just about a few more seconds to download. So at this point, we're going to wait till the download's complete, then we're going to do the install. So we're going to give it a second. We have 2 more seconds to go, 1 second to go, 0 seconds to go. We are all set. So let me open up this executable, and we'll go through the install process. Give it a second. It's still thinking. I have some things running in the background, so we will be patient and let it spin up the installation program. Now, the cool part about this, or one of the cool parts about the install, is it has a fairly light footprint. It doesn't necessarily, well, actually by default, it doesn't do anything such as write to your Windows registry, and it doesn't really install anything except Eclipse on your hard drive. Meaning that we don't got to worry about any supporting files or anything to be downloaded before it. There's really no prerequisites for this to work. Although it will work nicely if you have other versions of Java on your laptop or on your workstation. Like, for example, if you have different versions of the JDK, like JDK 1.8 or 1.7 or any of them, it works nicely with those. So let me see what's taking so long here. Let me just kind of like close this and see what's going on. If you're curious about where this is downloaded, you can find this in your downloads folder. So it looks like it's still going through the installer here. So we're at my desktop, and I apologize for some of these personal icons here, but nothing too terribly revealing. Just got a picture of me up here, got some Pro Tools, got some graphics I work with. There's a picture of my daughter, my wife and I, a picture of me. So nothing really too revealing here. So I'll save you the time and actually going through it. So let's go through the installer here. Now once we go through the installer, it's going to give us a couple of options. As you can see, it gives us a variety of different things that we can actually install. Now, what we're going to do is we're just going to do this guy right here. We're going to install the product, the Eclipse IDE for Java developers. We're going to skip these other ones, although useful, beyond the scope of what we're doing here. Again, the essential tools for any Java developer, including the Java IDE. We use Git if you're using source control, XML editor, Maven, and Gradle integration. You don't need to know any of that at the very start of this. You just need to know that it is a Java IDE. And again, this is worth learning. If you become a Java developer, you will use Eclipse. This is not a little niche thing. Again, I'm going through saying, hey, this is like a really cool tool that no one uses. Everyone uses Eclipse. It would be just like getting your driver's license and then someone giving you a car. And they're just like, well, you got your driver's license, you're going to use the car. Now, what kind of car you're going to use is going to be different, like here, but you're going to use it. Let's click on Eclipse IDE for Java developers. So anyway, it's going to do a couple things here. It's going to show me where it's going to do the install. It's going to install in users Bob, which is me, Eclipse, and then the version for the IDE. And again, it's going to install, any of the essential, which means the prerequisite tools for any of these sort of kind of Java projects you're going to write. Now here we got Maven and Gradle. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. You don't need to know about Git Client, XML editor, Myelin, anything. If you're just starting, just download the IDE, and we're going to get you started with a Java project. You can leave these as default. Create a start menu entry and a desktop shortcut. Say that 10 times fast after a couple martinis for lunch, and click on install. Now give it a second. Again, a lot of this is going to depend on your bandwidth, and I should point out that you need to have a dedicated internet connection for this to work. Otherwise, it will not. So at this point, what you can do is you could remember the accepted licenses. Read that if you like. It's fairly boilerplate stuff. Again, we're free as far as Eclipse goes. Click on accept. And then you'll notice that the installation installer keeps on progressing. So we'll monitor this, and as long as it's green, we're okay. Now, in most cases, your install should go fairly drama-free. There really shouldn't be any problems with this. Problems that you could have, if you're downloading really slow, we see a message out here that the download is progressing very slowly, so we'll give it a second. What's happening here is this download installation is happening all behind the scenes as far as what servers it's going to. Again, as I mentioned, you need to have an internet connection for this to work. So we'll give it a second to kind of work through the bugs and do the actual installation. Again, we're going to have to be patient with the install and just kind of monitor it, make sure it's installing okay. Now, a little bit ahead of this, so let's kind of fast forward while we're waiting for the install to finish. We're going to talk a little bit about the IDE and what you can actually build with it. Now, with the Eclipse IDEs, you have Java integrated within it. Now, depending on your experience with Javas, you might have some experience with command line Java or using the Java JDK, where you'd go to a DOS prompt or a command shell prompt depending on your environment. I'm assuming a Windows environment, and then you would just manually do a Java C to do your Java compile, and then a Java to actually run your Java program. Now, it's important to point out that Eclipse does the same thing, where what Eclipse does is, rather than act as your Java backend or act as your JDK or your JRE or anything of that nature, I'm going to give this a close. What happens is, what Eclipse does is it acts kind of as a shell for all these things. So like a traffic cop, it bundles all these things together in an integrated IDE that makes it easy for you to develop Java programs. Now, if you don't use an IDE or an integrated development environment like Eclipse, you'd have to use just a regular text editor like Notepad or TextPad or anything that's an ASCII text editor, or even Notepad++, which work just fine, except you don't have all those integrated tools in Notepad or Notepad++ that you probably would want to have if you're doing any kind of real Java development. And also, it takes the place of web compilers that you may be used to if you're doing anything with Java development, such as going to different websites that you can just put in the actual web page, the Java program, and then click on a button that would actually do the compile, and then perhaps even jar that application up and download it for your use as a developer to do deployment, either as a jar file or a series of jar files. So what the Eclipse IDE does is it allows you to do all of those things, or at least most of them, if not all of them and more, from one spot, where you have the ability to develop Java applications, to compile Java applications, and to run Java applications, and of course debug and deploy and do all that stuff from one inclusive integrated development environment. And also, since I mentioned since Eclipse is fairly modular meaning that you could just add on a bunch of stuff, and I'm being vague on purpose because, you know, how many things can you add on to Eclipse? I mean, dozens, hundreds, or I don't know, I've never counted them, but there's at least, you know, they're in the hundreds of different plugins that you can install in Eclipse. So quite literally, when you're doing a Eclipse install and then you kind of build out your Eclipse environment on your own local machine, you're going to notice eventually that your Eclipse environment becomes very custom to you. That's what makes it kind of difficult sometimes. I guess it might be a drawback, but maybe a good problem to have is if you have, you know, multiple users in your environment using the Eclipse IDE. The Eclipse IDE is very customizable, where if you go to your, you know, to your partner next to you, or you go to a workstation that's a partner in your team, you might sit down in front of their IDE, his or her IDE, and notice that things are in different spots, or it acts differently, the layouts are different, or the plugins are different. Because like I mentioned, it becomes like an old backpack or a pair of shoes. It becomes customizable to you, and you kind of build it out to do the things that you want it to do insofar as artifacts. And again, you see the artifacts that are downloading right here, or even the look and feel, such as the color of the text, type ahead compilers, and all that other good stuff. So we're almost done with the installation now, and as you can see, it just took really a few minutes. But you see the installer on the top of the screen as it's installing the different artifacts, and then you see the green progress arrow, in the middle showing the actual progress of the install. So we're almost done here. Like I said, as long as we're green, we're good. So here we got the message that the install completed successfully, and now what we can do is a few things. We could launch or do a few different things. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to go into launch, and we're going to launch Eclipse. Now we're done with the install, so let's launch Eclipse. And give it a second. And generally, after you do your install, you probably should do a clean reboot. What's a clean reboot? Just shut everything down, reboot your PC, and make sure that all your desktops are there. If not, you can create one. You saw the installation folder, so that's where Eclipse got installed. So let's bring up Eclipse for the first time. Now you should see your splash screen, which you see right here, Eclipse 2018. And we'll give it a second to start. Usually, the first time you start Eclipse on a system, it's going to take a little bit longer to run because it does some first-time setup stuff. Now, the first thing it's going to ask you for is it's going to ask you for a workspace. Now, I would suggest that you don't muck with this. Keep the same folder structure, at least until you get familiar with how Eclipse works. So basically, what this is doing is it's building a folder for us called Eclipse Workspace, where our Eclipse files are going to go. Also notice that we see here that we got Eclipse Java, you know, version 2018 installed here. Our desktop was created successfully. So in this case, let's click on Launch, and again, remember your workspaces here. And I would highly suggest, again, to repeat myself, which I often do, use this as a default. Don't change this until you get more familiar with how this works. So let's click on Launch. Now it's going to say here that the workspace was written with an older product and will be updated. This is fine. What this is saying here is I got this workspace here, these Eclipse Workspace was written with an older version of Eclipse. Now in this case, what I can do is I can just update the workspace, which means we're going to be using a new version of Eclipse, or if I want to save it, which I guess is possible, if I have old stuff here, I could click on cancel and go against my old advice and maybe change the workspace. But that's what this means. In our case, what we're going to do is we're going to click on continue, and we're just going to write over the old workspace, because as you can see, I got an older version of Eclipse on here. Click on continue, and we should be good. Now, again, it's going to take a little bit longer for the first time for Eclipse to get up and running, because it does some first time setup maintenance, and that's what you're seeing here. So while it's doing that, we should see the icon change, and we should see the text loading workbench on the lower left-hand side. As long as you see that, you're good. So be patient and let it install or finish the installation process, which it's doing right now, and Eclipse will start. Now, when Eclipse starts, we're not going to go through much of it because I just wanted to go through the install of Eclipse, where to find it, and how to do the installation. The actual functionality of Eclipse is really the subject for a series of other videos that we're not going to do here. Again, the goal here was to get you up and going as a beginner to get the Eclipse Workbench or the IDE, it's called the same thing, or they're used synonymously with each other, IDE and Workbench, to get this installed and up and running. At this point, once we establish that or accomplish that goal, I'm going to leave it to you to kind of take it a step further. But anyway, this is what your workbench looks like. Now, at the very, very beginning, what you can do is, this is kind of like your initial splash screen or your welcome screen. At this point, you want to go to your workbench. Your workbench is where all the cool stuff happens. This is where you do, not surprisingly, all of your work. And you're going to see your workbench is going to be set up. Now, you have your different panes here. Your Package Explorer, this is where your code goes. You have like your task list and your outline. So you have different views here. Like you have your different views that you actually can look at. Like for example, if you go to Project, or pardon me, if you go to Window, you could go to Show View, and this shows all the different views that you can put on or you can customize your IDE with. Now, these are all subjects for different videos. We're just going to keep this really simple. Like for example, we're going to create like a new Java program or project. So we'll go to File, and we will do New, and we're going to create a Java project. And we're going to create our Java project. We're going to say, this is first Bob project. Now notice a couple things here when you start a Java project. And again, this is your first step. After you're done doing Java project, you're going to spend the rest of your life creating a bunch of other stuff. Eclipse is impossible to grow out of. It's nothing that you master. You keep adding on to it. It keeps getting more complicated. Notice that you have different JREs that you can actually use. Like 1.8, you can use a specific one. You can use specific other JDKs. You can configure this. Like I mentioned, Eclipse is not Java. Eclipse just uses Java stuff that you already have configured. Again, so you usually need a JDK on your computer for this to work. In this case, I'm going to click on Next. This will show you some other stuff that's here. It shows us, for example, projects. You can have other projects that you want to add. Different libraries. Here we got the default Java runtime system libraries. We should be good. So at this point, we kind of click and choose the default, and let's click on Finish. Now notice we have Lambda, which was the default project that Java gave us, or I'm sorry, Eclipse gave us. Now we got first Bob project. Now there's a project here, but there's not really any code. Now this is something that's really special to Eclipse, is the concept of a project. If you're just doing raw bare bones Java on the command line, there's really no concept of a project. It's just a bunch of Java files. Here in Eclipse, you start a project, and then you, as part of your source code, is you write Java code. And we'll do that here. So from source, I'm going to go File, then New, and I'm going to pick New and then Class, and I'm going to pick a Java class in the default project package. You might not know about packages yet. If you don't worry about it. And we're going to call this Bob Test. Now this is very similar to something that you might have written in, if you're doing command line Java, that you might have written in Notepad or Notepad++. It's just the Java program is what you're writing, and you could choose for it to have a main method. In this case, we will do so. Click on Finish. And you'll see that in your code editor in the middle, what Eclipse is doing is it's building your Java program. Now this should look at least familiar to some of you that's got some experience at least writing a rudimentary Java program, but notice that we didn't have to write this from scratch. So here what we can do is just do our editing. We could make our program more robust. We can add methods, anything we want. So how about we do this? We do system.out and look at the type ahead here, where we could say out and we could say print line and we'll say something like, I don't know, this class is cool, but Bob is lame. Who can argue with that, right? And then we'll do a end quote. And then we'll do a colon. Now notice how when there's an error, you get that red kind of stop sign there. Like for example, if I screwed up, I did something like this. Notice you have what's called an inline Java compiler, which means that it finds the error while you're actually typing, which is cool because this is one of the first things that you're going to get used to when you're doing Eclipse. So now let's take the last step. Again, this is a very rudimentary, just few minute video on downloading Eclipse, installing Eclipse, and getting a Java program working in Eclipse. At this point, you can click the green run arrow or the run menu item. I'm just going to click the green run arrow, and then you'll see that Eclipse will run this Java program, and then it'll ask which one do you want to save. Yep, we want to save bobtest.java. And on the bottom, you should see the output. You see the console output. You see right here. This class is cool, but Bob is lame. So there you have it. So what did we do? Again, we navigated to Eclipse. We downloaded Eclipse, had a small summary lecture overview on what Eclipse does and which one to download. We downloaded Eclipse. We went through the installer. I showed you how to install Eclipse, what version to use. We went through the installer process. I showed you what a successful install looks like and also kind of went over some problems that you might have if you have a non-successful install. And then from there, we noticed that we had a successful install. Then a shortcut was correctly placed on our desktop. We started Eclipse. We built an Eclipse Java project. We built a Java program. And I showed you as we're building the Java program how there's a type ahead feature that compiles it as we go. There's really no Java C in Eclipse. It happens automatically for you while you're doing it. Unlike if you're doing this command line Java, from the DOS prompter or PowerShell, where you would actually have to do the compile step. Here it's done for you. All you need to do is save it, and then to run it, if there's no errors in there, again, there's no errors. And then you click the, I call it the running man because there used to be a little green man here, but now it's just a green arrow. So we'll call it the running arrow, the green running arrow, and then it runs the Java program, and then you can see the output right here. Now, albeit this was Happy Path, this is very basic stuff, but hopefully this helped you and saved you perhaps a few hours, if not maybe a day or two, of getting up to speed and just getting the basics up and going. Because now the sky's the limit. You could be using Eclipse for the rest of your life and modifying it and customizing it as your knowledge of Java grows. So thank you for listening, and I bid you all a very well rest of the day. Thank you so much.